Hello, and welcome to a very special episode, number 90 of Expertise is Overrated, the podcast that takes the time to answer the questions you didn't know you didn't want the answers to. I'm Vib, and I'm also Vib, not Sean. Fear not, though, he will be joining us for this episode. As I said, it's very special. We have an incredible guest, Lionheartx10, joining us, or rather perhaps we are joining him, to ask him all about the various announcements made by Creative Assembly regarding Total War, that is the Lord of the End Times DLC that's coming out for Total War Warhammer 3, as well as Total War Warhammer 40K, with a little bit on Medieval 3 as well at the end. This was recorded as part of a live stream that we did on Lionheartx10's channel, so please do go check him out. For all of those who are undoubtedly coming the other way, welcome. We do some intros during the live stream. If you like what you hear, please do come check us out. There's, as I said, almost 90 episodes of us to listen to. With the holiday period coming up, plenty to enjoy. So thank you for listening and have fun with this one.
We can introduce ourselves very quickly. So
please. Who are you guys?
We are Sean and Vib. We host a podcast called Expertise is Overrated, which I will drop a link to in the chat at some point. Middle of the way through the conversation, probably at the worst possible time. And Lionheart has very kindly agreed to let us come in, ask him a few questions about Creative Assembly, particularly Lords of the End Times, the Medieval 3 announcement. And before we organised this, we didn't know that we'd also be talking about Warhammer 40K, but we are. So that's very exciting.
Yeah. I sent a very last minute change of plans when we were scheduling this of like, you guys, I was like, I can't say anything really, because again, I'd heard this through a thing that I was not meant to like share, but I was like, you know, no one's going to find out about this until after the fact, so that's fine. But I was like, I'm not telling you specifically, but we're going to want to do this after the 11th.
I think we can vouch for you. You absolutely did not tell us why we had to wait until the 12th, but you told us we should wait until the 12th.
Yeah. I didn't tell you why, I just told you you should.
It was very kind of you, because otherwise we'd have looked like right idiots. Even more so.
Would have been on brand.
No bet.
It would have been. I guess the first question from us is 3 big projects announced, obviously Lord of the End Times, as I said, Medieval 3 and now 40k. It's a slightly unfair question, but which are you most excited for?
Well, to be honest, I can't choose between 40k and Medieval 3, mainly because I've known about 40k Total War outside of the rumours and speculation since May, because I actually got to go to the studio and have a little hands-on with a very early access, early alpha build of the game. It was mainly a feedback session that CA wanted to run with myself and a few other creators, much smaller than what they typically do. It wasn't kind of a prep event to prepare content from or anything like that. It was, you know, they were saying like, you know, we are so far out of you guys getting hands-on, recording anything. This is mainly feedback that, you know, some of our veteran players and creators can share some key feedback and just make sure that we're on the right track and they think this is going to be fun to play. And I think broadly the main reason why they're doing that, you know, without going into the specifics, which I can't talk about right now of what I played, but it's because it will be probably one of the biggest evolutions of the series so far. I mean, you can see that yourselves from the trailer, you know, already you get an idea that it's certainly changing the Total War mold from what it looks like. And it's got to adapt to work with 40k. But yeah, so I've known about that for 7 months now. So I've kind of had that, you know, on the back burner, knowing about that and thinking about that. Medieval 3 came as a complete surprise to me because there's been so many different rumors. World War 1 was thrown around, and again, various bits of speculation and some other rumors that kind of caught my attention were that essentially what they were doing is that they were, one, building a new engine, which we have had confirmed with Warcore through the 25th or 25 years of Total War showcase. They've announced Warcore, which is powering their new games forward, which obviously is 40k and Medieval 3 now, leading with that. But the rumor I heard was that they were building at the same time as this engine. They were building the framework for 40k and World War One at the same time, because they'd probably use a lot of the same sort of mechanics, mechanized, lots of infantry, potentially even I would assume cover, trenches, and obviously all the cover mechanics that people expect from a 40k title. I mean, yeah, a lot of people have, I think rightly so, guessed that the building that Creative Assembly showed in their showcase of the new engine, physics and stuff like that, very much looked like a World War One era building, and then they showered it with a load of artillery shells at the end. I was like, yeah, I think
it's quite clear.
So
it's quite clear that they, it could have easily been a 40k building. It's obvious why they didn't, but it's the same basic technology, isn't it? You need destruction of the environment in a way that you don't have in any of the titles at the moment.
I mean, the big evolution there, I think, is to battlefields now in future titles going forward. It's that they're not static anymore. They're going to be dynamic. There's going to be bits that, I mean, I don't know how in depth or how dynamic that's going to be. Whether you destroy a building, you create a new pathway. It probably creates loads of AI pathfinding problems, things like that. But at the very least, even if you can't change the pathing of it, you can go from, hey, this building prevents cover, blocks line of sight, things like that. Or you can destroy it, and then instantly you can then bombard onto that position. You may not be able to move troops through it, but you might be able to then bombard onto it. But I guess, to come back to 40k Med 3, didn't know about Med 3 until it basically got announced. I'd heard some whisperings. I'd, tracked these rumors about there being this World War 1 and 40k in development. And I think World War 1 essentially obviously didn't work out, but it allowed them to build up the engine to where they've been going, and obviously then inject everything into 40k. And more recently, Medieval 3, which they've they've said it's pre-production. I believe there is actually meant to be a stream next week where they're potentially going to talk about actually what that specifically means, because I think a lot of people think they basically wrote Medieval 3 on a napkin last week and then decided to announce it. I actually think they're potentially a little bit further along from that, but they're still probably well within their phase of what they deem is pre-production. So to be incredibly unhelpful answering that first question, 40k and Medieval 3 probably equally hyped for both right now. I just want to see more of both, or actually be able to tell you guys more about 40k, at least from my experience, but I can't do that too much.
And I think it's super encouraging that as you say, that CA are going to have some more showcases in the very near future. Be great
Definitely.
to see a bit more 40K.
Communication from them.
Be fantastic to, as you say, like the Medieval 3 kind of feels like, oh, we'll just say it because you guys want us to say it. So the fact that they're actually talking about it gives me hope, and they're not doing a Bethesda on us, which would be dreadful.
So if we stick with 40k for a while, apart from anything else, because we've just seen that absolutely fantastic trailer. What I've got to say for me is the most exciting thing for me, I think, is the fact that trailer's got gameplay in it. So this is, and obviously you said yourself, you've had a hands-on experience with it, albeit at a very, very early stage. But I mean, it can't be that far away. And so we've seen units, we've seen new mechanics, we've seen a lot of dynamism in that trailer that I think, as you put it, is going to bring a whole new flavour to what the Total War series is. And so from my perspective, I will hold my hands up. I was very sceptical of their ability to make Warhammer Fantasy, and boy, do I have egg on my face now. But that is a criticism or a concern that we've seen, isn't it, in relation to 40k as well?
Yeah, I mean, I say about talking about they'd never be able to do Warhammer Fantasy. I remember at the time saying I wasn't sure when they announced it. It was 2015. Attila had just come out, and then they were doing 15 years of Total War, and he had this big screeching roar of some kind of monstrous creature, and that was it. That's how then, and that's how I thought they'd do 40k in their showcase as a teaser, not one more thing. Game Awards, obviously, that was a last minute thing. They probably got a slot for it, and they were like, "Well, we'd be silly not to advertise and announce essentially at the biggest show at the end of the year." But yeah, I remember at the time thinking, yeah, Warhammer Fantasy, I mean, it'd be great if they could pull it off, but how do they do magic? How do they do flying units? How do they do single entity monsters? Because before then, we'd never seen anything outside of history. Even if you weren't as big a fan of the the recent historicals, Rome 2, Attila and things like that by that point, or even Empire. It's still even back to the days of Rome 1 and Medieval 2. We'd never seen anything outside of grounded history. So that was a big leap. But I always said with the reception, if they could pull off Warhammer Fantasy, the gloves were off. And I think that gave them a lot of creative development freedom to go, let's try stuff. It may not actually work, but it doesn't matter because we're not confined by history. So it doesn't matter if things are a bit weird and crazy because that suits the landscape of Warhammer. So I think the same thing is true here. We're at another point. So many people have been saying 40k just won't work in the formula. I think you could exactly go back to Warhammer Fantasy and say, Warhammer Fantasy won't work in the formula. It just won't be a total war game. I think those exact same comments were being said there. Okay, there are probably more things, more gunplay, more elements to consider with 40k, and there's a lot more dynamic scaling of factions present and available and represented. But I truly believe that if there was going to be a blocker, it would have been that blocker moving from historicals to their first fantasy setting in Warhammer Fantasy. So now, for me, the gloves are off. What they can try anything. They may not succeed at it. It may not work, but they can certainly try. I don't think there's any path to blocking them to actually trying to do it. And I think, worst case is they'll make a reasonable 40k game. What I hope they make is an extraordinary 40k game.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like, if the only thing that they make is basically Warhammer Fantasy in the 40k world, that will sell millions of copies and be really successful. And what we've seen from that trailer is that that's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to make at least an equivalent leap as the leap that they made from Attila into Warhammer 1. I guess turning to factions, I appreciate that there may be questions here that you're not allowed to answer, and kind of not even allowed to tell us that you're not allowed to answer. So we will tread lightly. But we've seen orcs and space marines, or Imperium, and I guess there's a question there. There's also...
Yeah, I was just going to open a tab to it, but I realized when I did that, it completely ruins the OBS recording and the streams. I was like, I'm not going to touch anything. I was like, and flip back. I'm just going to sit back.
It's Orcs, Imperial Guard, Space Marines, and Eldar, right? Those are the four confirmed query launch races.
Yeah, and so if they copy the Warhammer Fantasy mold, there will also be a Day 1 DLC faction. I think that's a safe bet. Who that faction will be,
I mean, they've said on the blog post that they're not planning a pre-order DLC.
That's not necessarily the same thing, though.
Last time, so.
Yeah, that's true. But then I guess we haven't had one for Warhammer 2 or 3.
Well, in Warhammer 2, it was meant to be Norsca, but then they ballsed up the implementation of Norsca.
It was the last DLC for 1 that was meant to be a pre-order bonus. Yeah, kind of linking across. I don't think we didn't have one for 3 though, did we?
Ogres. Ogre Kingdoms were Day 1 DLC for Warhammer 3, I think.
Were they?
Yeah.
Was it? So they did it's Day 1.
Sorry,
right,
it's not pre-ordered DLC, it's Day 1 DLC.
No, because the idea is they've moved away from, they don't want to incentivize a pre-order with locked content behind it.
I think that's right.
But it's additional content ready to go at the start.
I think that's right. Because
it's trying to remember back to it, to be honest, because I mean it was lots going on.
Viv is absolutely right. They got
40K.
a lot of criticism.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to work because it works for Warhammer. Well, but they did it for Warhammer 1, as you say. Because I can say, but for Warhammer 2 and 3, it sort of works. It's like, we already have the game, and it's just a continuation of this theme. I don't know, because I guess everybody wants it to be chaos, right? But I don't think people understand what that means.
There's obviously a lot. Yeah, which aspect of chaos do you want in? I think you've got kind of the typical face-off there with the orcs coming in and just causing a lot of chaos themselves, and everyone trying to patch around that. Basically, is probably the main antagonist, at least initially. I mean, obviously, it's going to be, and I think this is something that perhaps if people are unsure about this is probably something to say categorically from the start what to expect. It's going to be a DLC machine.
Yeah.
There is no doubt that they are not going to. I mean, if you think the Warhammer trilogy has had plenty of DLC, I would imagine this is going to up that up to paradox
Well,
levels.
You mentioned it
And
earlier. The faction scaling is absolutely obscene. So,
Massive,
so you've got,
and it's also there's factions within factions. We're going to be most likely getting DLC add-ons for more Space Marines or more. You know, I don't know. You know, what's the customization? There's a bit in the trailer at the end in the gameplay section where it kind of cuts in and it very quickly flicks through, you know, a load of different chapter colors to, I assume, show that there's some kind of customization, army painter, whatever they want to call it, in there, which is great. That's fab. But then does that also translate? Have they added in all Space Marine chapters and all of their core stuff? Or are we going to get like Space Marine Reinforcements DLC pack and it will add in some additional units or
so
things like that?
There's almost a mechanics question here that I have that's not to you, just generally out into the ether. I'm curious for people's views. So obviously Warhammer series is very much focused around the concept of the legendary lord, right? That's how they market their factions. Particularly recently, each of the DLC packs has been focused around a trio of legendary lords. That's a mechanism that would work really well in 40k as well, because 40k has infinitely more characters than Warhammer Fantasy had. But if you've got that faction customization that we saw at the end of the trailer, you struggle slightly to understand how you could have, let's say, Marnius Calgar as your legendary lord, but you could also customize the faction to be Blood Angels, Dark Angels, your own custom chapter, whatever it is, because those legendary lords are tied so inextricably to their factions. That's I don't know how you get around that without potentially just granting the player a huge amount of freedom, which isn't a bad thing.
I don't know. I think they'll just be guided by the codices, would be my guess, right? Because you can make any number of custom Space Marine chapters, for example, right? You can paint your Imperial Guard however you want. But if you want Lionel Johnson to be your leader, you need a Dark Angels faction, I think.
And that might be the answer. That'd be the simple way to do it.
Yeah, so the ones, the Space Marines which have the sort of add-on codices, I suspect, would be DLC or some sort of future update. But if you don't want to run around as Ultramarines, you run around as, you know, something that with yellow armor or something like that, you know?
Iron Fists and stuff, yeah. I mean, I assume they're going to have, like most of the core, like, I guess, straightforward Space Marine chapters just in there. And I assume, actually, with the way that they've announced it, for now at least, it's going to be faction-led rather than, hey, this is Calgar's, you know, you choose him and then you dive. I don't think it's going to be Legendary Lord led. I think you will have legendary characters that are pertinent to your chapter or to your faction that you're playing as, and then you can choose to interact. Just because otherwise I don't think it quite works if you have it all led top down from a single lord, quite like we have done in Warhammer 3. I don't think it's, I mean, obviously there are key characters, but I don't quite know how they can craft the whole of a Space Marine chapter, or say, like, because there's so many different, I mean, Orc-Hordes change their leader every day, basically, you know, who they take out, who the war boss is.
No, I mean, that's absolutely right. So just grab it.
I also, from a future historical Total Wars perspective, I want to go back to playing as a set faction and then having, I think this is probably where my thinking comes. I'm also thinking Medieval 3, I don't want to play as Richard the Lionheart leading England. I want to play as England, and I just so happen to have a key character that includes Richard the Lionheart, potentially as a but again, I don't want single entities in that. I want retinues and classic bodyguards.
Yeah, we'll come on to talk about
that. That's why I think I'm trying to say that's what I want for 40k. I want that formula because it's a new engine. I want that to be the foundational building block of how we treat factions and races again, rather than them being legendary lord down.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. And I'm encouraged by what they've written on their blog post or their news post, right, where they're saying, you know, tailor your faction's combat philosophy for both campaign and battle, arming them with unique, you know, fusion of devastating tactical ability, signature traits, and arcane war gear, implying it's not a legendary lord and you can unlock his famous sword or whatever, right? It's saying here's a bunch of tactical marines, give them whatever you fancy and make them unique, and let that define your faction, as opposed to, as you say, the
or it's almost like the heroes are an add-on to the rest of the units as such, rather than being the focal point, which is my thinking as well. Reading through that blog post, it does make it seem like they're framing it around faction at the top, and then there's stuff within that faction that you can interact with, rather than legendary lord, then race, then faction, you know, all the way down. So I think that's going to be an interesting shift to see how that. I mean, maybe it's completely wrong, and they're suddenly going to be like, right, yep, here's the legendary. Because I mean, I guess at least if they stick to legendary lords, they know exactly how to frame and build additional content as well, all around that. Yeah, that's one of those things that we need some more stuff from CA on, or how that's like structured.
I think people will want them, right? Fundamentally, I think somebody will want to be able to play as Rowboat, for example.
But I guess the way you two are talking, you could still do that. You still have access to those characters, but they sit within your faction rather than defining your faction.
And I think also that reflects the tabletop more, because not everyone that wants to play Ultramarines has to have
exactly
Gilliman leading. They can have a captain. You could have Titus, or you can have, you know, one of the other key Calgar. You know, everyone has their own favorite pick because there's lots of key characters. And if you just restrict it to you can only always play as them with this guy leading the charge, that also doesn't really make sense, because a lot of it is delegated out and everyone's doing their own separate campaigns. They're under, you know, top-down orders, sure, but there's lots of different things happening. And I think the only way it makes sense to incorporate all those characters is by having them part of a faction, not defining the faction.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think the other side of it that's going to be really interesting to see is the campaign map level. So we've seen quite a lot in the trailer, both in the cinematic side and in the in-engine trailer of the battles, and they look like 40k battles. They don't look a million miles away from the Dawn of War 4 footage that we've seen, but that's because 40k has a recognisable aesthetic. So every game set in 40k looks the same, broadly. But trying to put that on a galaxy-wide scale, which is what it sounds like they're trying to do. Someone in chat, I'm sorry, the message has scrolled past, but someone called out that it looks a lot like Empire at War, that old Star Wars game. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to be really impressive if they can crack that as well. If they can give us, it doesn't need to be galaxy-wide, but sector-spanning campaign gameplay that has that link with the battle layer below, but you still feel like you're operating at this enormous scale. Because scale is what's going to really define this game if it works.
That's going to be absolutely huge. I'm actually going to disagree with you in terms of saying that it looks a lot like Dawn of War. I think, yes, in so far that there are orcs and space marines on screen. And I wonder if part of that was actually deliberate. But there's just more mass, right? It's much bigger already. You're not sort of picking out necessarily individual space marines that are fighting, right? You're picking out enormous blobs launching into each other, and I'm hoping that translates. I mean, I don't think Dawn of War will necessarily go into the sort of interplanetary thing. I'm really hoping Total War will, and I'm really hoping that it's going to be so huge that, I guess, to Lion's point, it's going to be limited gain to have a rowboat leading an army when there's 50 armies that you're controlling, as it were. Maybe that's too much scale, but that's how I'm picturing this.
Yeah, I mean, so the glimpse we've had of the campaign map in that gameplay right at the end is well at the upper end of my hopes and expectations. I mean, we've been talking about it on stream for months and months, and I've always said the safe option that they could do would be, you do it like Dark Crusade. It's a single planet. You make a narrative. You say there's an ancient artifact, and then you go, there's these 5 races or factions that are all fighting all over it. And then they could do a standard Total War campaign map, and they all be fighting over it, and you'd have outposts and bases that each would be constructing. It would make a lot of sense. That would be the really safe option for them to do. And it looks like they've not even remotely gone near that. They've gone for probably the most ambitious one they could go for, which is multi-planetary. I mean, I don't know how many planets are in was it like 4 or 5 that we saw initially, right, in that bit? But I assume that is just a small part of how big they're going. I mean, I don't necessarily quite expect it to be equivalent to what Immortal Empires with how many settlements does that have? 300 plus? I don't expect it to have 300 planets necessarily, but it certainly feels like we're going to get something. I would have thought perhaps up to the hundreds or so of ones that you can go and conquer, especially if they're talking about sectors and galaxies, and forging your empire through the stars. That is well beyond kind of the grandest hopes of where I thought they would go with the campaign. I mean, there's still some massive questions, and I now know, I've got nothing to kind of really guess of where they're going to go with it, because this is well beyond what I thought they'd do. I thought they'd play it safe. I thought there's so many other mechanics and things they'd be adding in for the first time. Sure, I want them to be ambitious. I want them to push things so much further. I'm not happy with it just being a copy and paste. But with everything else that they'd probably be adding into this, I wouldn't have necessarily blamed them for it. I would have been probably a bit disappointed, but I'd have been like, let's see how it goes. Let's hope that they add in more planets as we go on, or something like that. But this is seemingly as bold and ambitious an option as they could have gone for with the campaign map. And I guess that, to me, leaves one final question of the battles, from what we've seen of that short clip at the end, that looks fairly familiar as in Total War style. I think it's going to be, if the campaign is this broad, multi-planetary, galaxy-spanning thing, I think that's going to be the point where most people go, it's unrecognizable as a Total War title.
I think that's right. I think that's absolutely right. I mean, we've just seen in chat, so Bongo Snodgrass, for example, suggesting that the planets are just going to be like settlements in Warhammer Fantasy. I think that's probably true, but I don't necessarily see that as a problem. It's just you need some sort of mechanism for empire building and what have you. So you need a proxy for settlements, and if that proxy is planets, then all well and good. But I don't think we've actually seen enough of the game to make that call. It's entirely possible that the planets are more like provinces, and there's a whole galactic layer and then a planetary layer within that.
There's a lot actually. Neuros is saying as well, there's quite a few people saying, I wonder if there's multiple layers to this, where you're into a system level and then you come out another one and there's another. So, and that, this is a bugbear for me. I typically don't call Total War games grand strategies. That is the mark of a grand strategy game, having those multiple campaign layers. And I mean, I almost wonder if maybe they would do planets similar to how Stellaris does planets, where the battles would be different, but I hope that it's not you just attack a planet once and that's it. You claim it. I hope that maybe you've got to conquer. Maybe they're split into like 3 or 4 little. That
was my province idea, like basically.
Kind of similar to what Soulstorm and I mean Dark Crusade, but that was just one planet. But it had different regions. It doesn't need to be as in depth as that, because it would take forever to take one planet. But maybe it's that you've got to fight. I don't know, or maybe they do it as like each one's almost like builds up to like a mini boss battle, or the different types of battles you had in Dawn of War and Dark Crusade, where it was like the first one is you smash the army in the field, the second one is you're assaulting an outpost, so it's like a siege battle, and the third one's like a big boss climactic finale or something like that over a strategic point. And then you can claim the planet as such, and also that gives you fallback points. If someone comes and invades your planet, you go, okay, I'm going to lose the field battle, but I can hold them at the second stage, as it were, push them back or reinforce or something like that. But yeah, I mean, it gets me excited for the campaign, thinking that I know, the really is we know nothing right now apart from what we can extrapolate from that, and also our hopes. And a lot of people are thinking, I think, the same way of going that multi-layer. And I think hopefully that is the direction they're going, a campaign within a campaign. I mean, that completely screws me over for like a Let's Play, because where does my Let's Play start? Does it start on the top layer, or is each Let's Play, are we doing seasons now? We'll be doing Space Marine. Welcome to Space Marine Season 5, Episode 421, because we're now in our 5th Crusade campaign in a secondary system or something.
Can't wait.
That's future me's problem. Yeah, great. But that is truly exciting, and I think, that will make me go, you know what? And I'm not trying to just be pedantic about going, I'm not going to use the term grand strategy, but I think that is a miscommunication from what they actually think they're delivering and what they actually do deliver a lot of the time.
I think,
but that layer to me goes, grand strategy.
No, I fully agree. And I really hope that they have fun with it, they being CA, obviously, because I think there's potentially 2 ways in which they can kind of go about it at the even bigger scale, right? They could do the sort of, everything's trapped in a warp storm, so we're literally dealing with this one system. And then I think we're more in the sort of traditional Total War era where, yes, you have to build a settlement. That's where you get your troops and your production from. But this is also the first time where they have an opportunity to say there is life outside of this planet or these 5 planets, right? Because we have Terra all the way back there. We've got wherever the orcs are coming from. We've got all this, right? So you can come up with like grand supply lines from a whole Imperium that's supporting whatever's going on in this particular sector. So some of the focus of the strategy on the campaign map might be quite different, and I think they could explore that because you're not locked to this one geographical planet like in every other Total War game. They may not choose to do that because I think you're right that you run the risk of going too many layers up.
Well, how broad are we going to go?
You could also go so wide that none of your systems have any depth, right? If you put all those layers in, but actually none of the layers don't talk to each other. So what you do at a galaxy level,
they don't do anything. They
exactly.
Just look pretty.
But that doesn't feel like what they're going for if you look at the way they're talking about it. So just a last couple of questions. I think. Do we think we'll have space battles? I hope so. But I don't think so.
No, I don't think so. I mean, we haven't had naval battles for Warhammer Fantasy, and there's CA have never, as far as I'm aware, never actually gone, kind of given a non-politician answer of going, it's because we don't have the license, or it's because we don't have the funding. My inclination is I think they could probably get the license if they, they could work on something in between, or they could make some kind of arrangement work. But I would imagine it's probably down to a pure cost thing, right? Because if they have to do naval battles potentially as in depth as land battles with all the different variations and things like that, that's nearly the same budget for whatever they have for battles, probably at least double, but then you've got extra costs for water physics and everything else and wind or whatever else you're adding in. So I assume that's why, we don't have it in the Warhammer trilogy. And I think they're doing so much already, and now especially seeing that campaign map starting to zoom out, and you could kind of almost see it wanted to keep going, and they were like, no, we're going to cut that there and keep that for January when we show them more. If it's as expansive as that and it's actually in depth, and as you say, not kind of just like shallow layers that doesn't really add anything, I'm assuming that, developmentally and budget wise, they can't make it affordable at this point right now. My hope is, though, if we're not having space battles, some kind of boarding actions and do it similar to how they've done it in Warhammer 2 and 3, where, if you have 2 ships meet, everyone agrees quite happily to go and board somebody else and it turns into a land battle. It's not a great solution, but it's better than nothing than it just turning into a dice roll that you do, although that would be fairly apt for 40k, turning it into dice rolls. But rather than it just being some menu system and you go, oh, look, here's my, because it could turn into how, say, like Crusader Kings or EU5 does battles in total, and it's just menus and you watch it simulated out rather than actually getting to be invested in it.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So I'd say I'd like to see boarding actions and have that as a, build a hangar map. Maybe you can't even go with your full army or whatever. Maybe you can only deploy like 5 units as a boarding action to try and take over the enemy ship.
It just doesn't need it, honestly. I get it. Everybody wants to see it, right? Everybody wants to see the space barge battles. It just doesn't need it. I think there's going to be so much to get on with. It's cool that you can do the orbital bombardments and things, right, based on the trailer, but I'm happy with that. If I can just maneuver 1 or 2 ships around into strategic positions, that's one thing. But I want to control. I think
they're going to be a support focus rather than an actual active part of gameplay.
As you say, otherwise then you're also managing fleets of like 40 units, right? It gets way too ridiculous, I think.
Oh, I to be completely clear, I think you're both right. I think it would be fantastic if they could, but I mean, Battlefleet Gothic is an entire game all by itself.
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
And it's a huge
you'd be
game.
Combining 2 games.
Just to call out, people in chat are pointing out they've built a new engine, and one of the things that they've called out about the new engine is its vehicle capabilities. It was a thing that they were focusing on in the engine, so it's a possibility. But I think
but I mean, you've got Land Raiders and Stompers in the trailer, right? So you need vehicle physics one way or another.
Give me my Imperial Knights.
Well, exactly. Give me Titans, and then I guess just keeping one eye on chat. We could probably move on to talk about Nagash in a minute, but do we? My sense is this is at least another trilogy worth of games. Maybe not broken down that way, but I mean, they've been milking the Warhammer Fantasy cash cow for 10 years now with no end in sight.
And that's based on something that up until recently was dead in terms of what Games Workshop were producing more content for, and they're coming back at it now. And I think very much kind of reading through the lines of what CA are saying a lot in their communications is when they talk about how Lords of the End isn't going to be the last DLC. It's, you know, it's almost the beginnings again still. They still want to keep making content for as long as people are interested. I think it's also going to link into, if Games Workshop keep bringing out cool new stuff as well and refreshes, we'll incorporate some of that into our game as well, because more people finding the hobby for the first time or revisiting it because of these new additions to their old favoured old world factions is going to reinvigorate the rest of the content around that. I mean, yeah, there is no way that it makes any kind of financial sense for them not to, you know, for lack of a better phrasing, milk it for 10, 15 plus years. There's enough content. They will not run out. I mean, we've just had, you know, the 500 Worlds of Ultramar. You know, they could work that in somehow. I mean, I feel like Titus is becoming the new poster child for all things Ultramarines and Space Marines, and in terms of video games as well, becoming a very prominent character that people want to interact with and engage with outside of just the Space Marine franchise as well. So, I mean, you could even probably see some crossovers. I don't know, maybe, you know, here's the Titus pack.
He's got like 3 tabletop models. It's a bit, it's a bit ridiculous. I'd actually forgotten this.
What's going to be interesting? Sorry, Sean, go ahead.
I was going to say credit again to Bongo Snodgrass, who needs a different name, but
that's a cracking name.
Consoles. They've made it very clear that 40K will come to consoles. They've made it very clear that part of the reason for building a new engine is console compatibility. I know some people are worried about that. I'm not personally, because Age of Empires 4 came to consoles, but I don't know if you two have any thoughts on that.
My answer to that is Baldur's Gate 3. Different control sets for keyboard and mouse and controller. And I'm sure there's other examples out there, and it's just the recent one I can think of, and it works flawlessly as far as I'm concerned.
I think that the knee-jerk reaction is to when you hear about consoles for something that is exclusively in PC, is they go, right, what's getting cut? What of our PC experience is going to be lessened by the development? They're going to go, well, either the budgets, you know, they're not going to be able to make as big a game anyway because they're going to have to sub-develop for the other consoles. I mean, my understanding of how development often works is that's just not the case. They would actually apply for a bigger budget to have to allocate for that, because you've got to make the core game and then you've got to think about what the platforms that it's going on, and that's kind of a subdivision of how that works. But also in this case, they should have the biggest budget possible, because they'll also look at what the return on investment is going to be. And if we're going to triple our platform reach into the console market of PlayStation and Xbox, they're going to go, yeah, how much do you want? Another 0 or 2? Yeah, sure, keep going. I don't think that any of the fears are are wrong to have right now about worrying. Does it mean there's going to be cut content? Does it mean there's going to be less performance? What's it going to do to our UI? Because are they going to go at this from let's design the whole game to work on all 3 systems from the start, or are they going to go from a place of the PC core experience is the sacred kind of holy part of this. We cannot mess this up for our core existing audience. We then have to figure out how we make anything that might conflict within that core PC experience work on consoles. I.e., as you said, like Age of Empires or Baldur's Gate. I mean, for me, the examples I'd give are Crusader Kings 3 on console. That is an incredibly in-depth grand strategy, and Paradox have, you know, completely unapologetically gone, we're not changing any of the features because that would lessen the experience. What we're going to do is give you a completely different UI experience on console. And I don't think Creative Assembly is stupid. They're there to make as much money as possible with the products that they're selling at the end of the day. They will not achieve that if they go about designing it any other way other than full Total War experience with a separate UI or UI adjustments and control scheme for consoles where applicable. Lots of people I've seen on Reddit and already replying to my tweets today about it have been saying, but what about the performance? Well, Total War games already scale for low tier PCs to high tier PCs. We have and I think this is perhaps an advantage that Total War has natively, is that it's had, since its inception, a unit scale option. And it will just mean, and I think as well, looking at the game, a lot of people say, oh, that scale doesn't look that big or whatever. In all their promo stuff that I think they've ever done, they've always had it on like normal or large at the highest. They've never had it on ultra unless they specifically specify that in their content. They always run it a little bit lower because it'll probably perform better. It'll look better for their systems and what they're capturing on. But I would assume that a PS5 is essentially a fairly kind of sort of middle of the road gaming PC. I assume that's probably going to aim to run on like high settings with large unit scale. But I would assume that they might have a performance mode and a quality mode. And if you want the quality of it increase things, it will drop your unit scale down to normal. You'll have slightly less troops, but it will look prettier. That makes the most sense. So that already has no impact on the gameplay outside of how it is already impacted on PCs, because obviously there are different balancing profiles across some of the different scales, or some things are better balanced. I think they actually design and balance the game around normal to large unit size anyway, so you sometimes see some irregularities on ultra anyway, and it's why they often sometimes for games that support extreme unit size don't recommend
don't do
necessarily
this.
playing on that because it's not balanced for that. But they're like, oh, there's a caveat of saying if you want to play on extreme, great, but just know that everything's balanced for ultra or lower. I don't. If I could say any more about my own experience, I would do getting into the specifics. But I mean, there was one response I think I had someone, which was that if I could say more, I think I'd be able to kind of confidently put people's fears at rest, sharing that information about the experience. So kind of not answering it, but kind of sort of saying nothing flagged up to me going from that early access build going, oh yeah, I think they're going to have performance issues on console. I think it will be actually a catastrophic miscommunication and misstep by CA if they do go the approach of going, well, on PC you've got this feature, but on console you don't. And I don't think they do that, because I think actually what they would do is go, we're not having this feature because it won't work across all systems.
Yeah, I think that's right. I just want to pick up on something that you said as well in relation to scale and people being worried about scale, because that's something that I've seen quite a lot of talk about on social media as well. And I think the problem that we might have is people are scaling everything off Space Marines, which is the wrong benchmark. If you look at the screenshots that are on the Steam page, there are half a dozen Space Marines in the squads that we see, and there are like 80 orcs in an orc squad. You can see you can count the models on screen. So even if that is at normal or large unit size, Space Marines are just the wrong barometer for unit scale, because it looks like they're going more down a lore accurate scale than a tabletop accurate scale. Blunt is my view. Yeah,
I think again, these early kind of marketing shots and things like that they'll announce with are it's a bit frustrating, because they're going to go for ones that look good but not necessarily think about the broader implications. Because I know right now people would probably really like them to also acknowledge, what's the unit cap? Is it just 12 units? Because we saw there were only 12 Space Marines. Is that the maximum? That's terrible. We had 20 or 40. Like, obviously, there looks like there's a massive amount of space on that lower bar for them to add in more chunks of 12 by 12, or not 12 by 12, but chunks of 12 more across that, how they're stacked. And I assume that's the case. But also, as you say, Space Marines, it would make sense that perhaps they actually could only field, I don't know, maybe say 12 units at a time, because also you've got to balance them being incredibly powerful, that can quite literally kick through thousands and thousands of enemy hordes and what have you, versus how scarce they are, or how they're meant to be anyway, and how much, I assume there'll be a requisition resource or something like that, how much you'd have to invest into a system to actually deploy a full company of Space Marines.
You could only recruit Space Marines from a single world. That's the way they work. So you can't, which is another thing I suppose we could spend ages talking about, just 40k. I mean, people are saying, there'll be like Ogre Kingdoms, which I think is probably going to be, at least in the way they interact with other things on the battle map, that's probably going to be the right way to do it.
But then on the other end of the scale, within 40k, you've got your more traditional sized factions like the Astra Militarum, like the Orcs being a massive horde, or eventually if they did a Tyranny DLC. I mean, if they do it, of course they're going to bloody do it. It's ridiculous if they don't. They're going to do them all, aren't they? We're going to get down to this point that people are like, I really hope they add in this really obscure little tiny thing. I mean, to be fair, I'd be like, just coming back to the whole like Space Marines, what do you expect? Give me some Grey Knights as a separate little thing somewhere, because I loved Chaos Gate. That up until perhaps, ask me again like a year once we've had Dawn of War 4, and then maybe a bit later for Total War 40k. But Chaos Gate is easily my favourite 40k game, because it just felt so much fun being an elite kick-ass, even more elite kick-ass Space Marine squad than the rest, because
I don't know. I think we've probably fielded most of the questions that have come through from chat.
Strokes. The point is, it's exciting.
We are. That's the thing, isn't
40K
it?
40k is exciting.
Where do you want to go now? I'm conscious of time. We've got Nagash and we've got Medieval 3. Let's do
Nagash, because we've got actually the most content on that to kind of talk about, and then Medieval 3 can be
a little teaser at the end.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to run the trailer or should we just dive in? It's entirely up to you.
I can run the trailer. I've got that. Totally, he says.
Obviously, this is the DLC that was announced during the 25-year showcase last week. And as you said earlier, they're billing this as kicking off almost another wave of DLC and a change to the way the game works.
Oh, here we go.
Here we go. Yeah, they can't hear us now. That's all good. I think we covered all the. I
think so. We were
just on 40k, because it's one of those things that we'll just keep talking deeper and deeper into minute points. So like, there's this one sentence where they say this one thing, I'll be like, what does that mean? I mean, I assume that's what all the other content creators are going to be doing over the next couple of weeks of videos on like single line topics, which totally fair.
And
one thing that's interesting, I think, we don't necessarily have to discuss it now, but end times makes a lot of sense in fantasy, right? Because it's a finished story, as it were. Yeah. What'll be interesting to see, and this is the Titus stuff, I think is so cool. Like, they can really use 40k Total War as a means of developing the 40k lore and story, which they may well do. I mean, who knows what that's going to culminate in? The Emperor getting back up. That's what. But
yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how integrated CA and Games Workshop are on releases and things like that, because as you said, fantasy's dead. Broadly, they brought back Old World, but fantasy's dead. 40k is very much alive and developing.
Yeah, I mean, I always said throughout the trilogy, I always expected them to essentially kind of tie in, like, you buy this physical mini, it's got a code on the back, and you put it in, it appears in game. And I would have thought that that is a huge way of making some additional money. So I wouldn't be surprised if they do some tie-ins like that. The only thing we ever remotely had was Grombrindle for a month. You could get exclusively through the magazine, that month's White Dwarf magazine, and then they made him free for everyone. But they should be doing more of that. Like, it makes so much sense to, etc. Yeah, just chilling with his
little head.
I'll be back. Yeah. The voice actor on Twitter said he was really hyped to be back doing more lines for Cetra. I was like, yeah, that's great.
So
Love that.
Good.
Right. Just totally random thing, but I always find that big eye of like Sega, like the most jarring thing at the end of every single one of their trailers. Like,
it's so creepy.
I kind of wish it was just Sonic popping up going like, gotta go fast or something. Like, what's with the eye? Like,
these are the real questions we want answers to.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Screw end times. Let's figure out, why is there an eye?
Well, that's very podcast appropriate for us. We always talk about absolute nonsense.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Get very, very
here we go.
Deviated.
Right. Throw out the stuff you actually came for. Why is there an eye at the end of every for the Sega branding of the trailers? Let's go.
Oh, excellent timing from Sean there. It's very nice.
Oh, I've got it ready to go.
Boom, fire that podcast straight in there. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I mean, Nagash, fantastic. People have been wanting Nagash, I think, since day one, Warhammer 1. And I think you and I, in fact, the three of us, have always spoken about how the End Times is an obvious event to put in the game, because like it or love it, it was a huge event in the tabletop and in the lore, and it adds a load of new characters and changes up a load of new characters. So again, really, really exciting to see. What were your thoughts? Obviously, you've known about Nagash for longer than we have, but what was your takeaway when that's what CA told you that they were going to be announcing?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if we saw an early version of that trailer or not, actually. But there were cheers around the room. Everyone was pretty excited for that, because it was some, as you say, it's not just a regular piece of DLC; it's an event in the Warhammer Fantasy universe, and even if you don't know that much about the lore, most people have an inkling that was, that's where it all really goes to shit, literally, and that's where it also, you have these really big dynamic events and situations occurring, and everything you thought you knew kind of gets turned on its head one way or another, intentionally or not. So it's, and I think the way that Creative Assembly themselves have already started talking about it, that it's not just about recreating the end times, it's actually about forging your own end times, I think is a really nice, subtle way of going, if you weren't happy with how Games Workshop blew up the world, try and stop it or forge your own ending, which I think is, that's what, at the crux of it, what Total War's about, be it the historicals or the fantasies. It's about creating your own sandbox strategy adventure. It's one of those choose your own adventures in essence. And this, while being a fixed event with a fixed outcome, is going, try and see if you can change it. What happens if you stop Nagash, or what happens if you do this, or what happens if you stop the Skaven bringing down the moon? What happens if the lizard men don't fuck off to space?
It's going to be a nice field test for Medieval 3, right? Not to jump the gun, but they've made it quite clear that they want to create that experience of. I was thinking, it's history, but who cares? End times is the same.
You have very different expectations of Medieval 3 than me. If you think Nagash is the test.
He's just going to show up, we're leading Richard the Lionheart into battle, and oh god, why is Nagash here? The DLC is bleeding over. Yeah,
enormous crossover.
All the lizard men turn up, because that's where they
exactly. That's where where's the lizard men gone otherwise?
I think the core of the messaging is it is about returning Total War to that ultimate sandbox. Yeah. You've got these now, and this is the way of going, because people think ultimate sandbox is Immortal Empires, what we currently have, and I think the biggest weakness of Immortal Empires is that there's no story, there's no narrative, and yet you're in this rich world where which is full of story, full of narrative, and yet none of that is present in the game. And that is, I think, probably its biggest weakness overall right now, in that there is no story being told. And I think that's also a part of what the DLC is trying to do. It's tell a story, but also let you have nearly infinite ways that you can interact with that story and change its path as it unfolds.
And they've tried with recent DLCs to put some more of that story back in. If you look at Aislinn or Sale in particular, because those are the series that you've got going on at the moment, their victory, I think they did the same for the Dark Elves in Tides of Torment. The victory conditions have changed, so the victory conditions are much more dynamic and narrative now than they've been. You've always had that the corruption mechanic, which if you're certain factions allows you to sort of see your empire spreading across the land, and that had a very minor impact on battlefields and things like that. What it sounds like they're doing with Nagash is just turning that up to about 11,000.
Yeah.
Appropriate.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it.
So obviously he's got his Confederation mechanic, which I assume all very much looking forward to. This idea of going around the map, collecting legendary lords, I guess hoovering them up from other factions. That's what it sounds like he's going to be doing.
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be like rip them out of a faction, either then the faction just crumbles everything into ruins because he's ripped away their legendary lord to become one of his Mortarchs, or whether it's you take the legendary lord away and some other chap steps up and goes, oh right, I'm the boss now, okay.
Steve von Carstein.
I assume it's probably Gary just steps in to
not Gary,
but
Gary's too powerful.
Not Gary, yeah, no one likes Gary von Carstein. I had to send him to the mountains. I guess thematically it would make more sense if you rip the legendary lord away to be a Mortarch, the rest of the faction crumbles to kind of show the importance of them. So I feel like it's going to be more of that mechanic and less. Confederation almost sounds kind of happy and cuddly. This is going to be more like, I'm ripping you away and you're mine now. In my pocket you go. Oh, your faction's dead. That's nice. No use you being over there then if they're all dead.
It's more like domination than confederation.
More like a kidnapping, really, isn't it? I'm going to
Yeah, I'm trying to think what else they've announced. So obviously they've announced a few new.
What I feel like has been overshadowed is what looks an awful lot like Neferata is in that trailer.
Yeah,
and yet it's just completely ignored. It's like it's all about Nagash.
I mean, they've hinted at her for quite some time though. So initially I thought she'd just come as her, because they floated this idea of doing smaller single lord packs. I think about a year ago. I think because they were trying to figure out how do they fix a content drought where they're working on the next major DLC, they're delaying it. It's probably going to take another year to get out. Do they drop in single Lord packs in the interim, which actually probably sounds pretty good. It's ways for them to keep the game fresh and still do tie in some major updates, thematic reworks around some factions, but also still give people an option for more content and also explore perhaps some more obscure characters that fit a single Lord pack a little bit better. But it sounded like for the longest time they were planning on her being just a single Lord pack, I guess perhaps a primer before Lords of the End Times, but now it seems more like they're just gone, no, let's give you the full fat Neferata experience as part of Lords of the End Times.
I suppose it's entirely possible that was the plan, right? Neferata should have dropped now-ish as a single Lord pack in preparation for Lords of the End Times, but then because Tides of Torment got pushed and pushed and pushed, there's no space for her. There's no marketing space for her.
Yeah, because we ended up being a whole year between Omens of Destruction and Tides of Torment, which, I mean, just goes to show, because again, at the event we were also showing some Tides of Torment stuff, and I think they didn't talk about release dates then, other than that this is our latest DLC that you'll be hopefully seeing soon. I think it was probably soon after that event that the delay came in, because they kind of we didn't test play that then, but I mean their communications that they put out was that they internally, their playtest had essentially said that they weren't happy with it, or it wasn't as fun as they wanted to achieve with that, so it needed reworking, which is good, because I think it's a pretty reasonable pack, to be honest. I think it sits somewhere between Omens of Destruction and Thrones of Decay.
Aislinn is really fun
with those DLC. Yeah,
what more do you want?
But I think, as we said, it's the return of a little bit of a narrative focus. Like Sale having a whole big dark ritual to work towards is a really fun narrative, but also you've got all the tools to run away with that and do whatever sandboxy stuff you want beforehand, and then when you're ready to pack it in, you can go, fire me dark ritual.
Yeah, absolutely.
I kind of wonder if broadly, initially there'd been a plan of maybe syncing up some of these narrative ending events to hint towards the next thing. And as you say, if Neferata had come out now, would she have ended with some big climactic battle, but then off in the distance there would have been the shot of kind of how that trailer shows Cetra at the end glowing, and those that know the lore kind of know what comes next in terms of what Cetra does or what happens to Cetra. I kind of wonder if they were ideally, in a perfect world, going to kind of build the narrative linking in, because that's what they broadly did between Warhammer 1 and 2 with the story. And it was only in Warhammer 3 that we realised that actually all of this had happened. Warhammer 3 was happening at the start of it all, and then you were seeing 1 and 2 events happening simultaneously, following on from Ursun and the Demon Prince, and how you chose to interact through that Lost God campaign. So yeah, I mean, narrative flavor coming back is great to see and hear about.
It is, but it sort of feels to me like they've got a lot of work to do to get it to a stage where if you introduce a really narratively driven end times. Because currently it's still a bit disjointed, right? Overall, the flavor, as you said, of Immortal Empires in particular is sort of just, here's a big sandbox, go nuts. I feel they have to do a little bit of work to introduce a character who's like, no, this matters to everybody now.
Yeah, and I think they're very wary of obviously not repeating when they went full narrative and railroaded it with Realms of Chaos. Which was obviously the opening campaign for Warhammer 3, that good for a playthrough or two, but then you've seen it, you've done it, it doesn't change. You're ending up playing a very specific way every single time, despite the fact there's some fun, interesting features sprinkled in there as well. I think they then went completely the opposite end of the spectrum with Immortal Empires, going, Ultimate Sandbox, no narrative, we need no objectives, just go. Yeah. And the real answer is a nice middle ground, as you say. The whole map is filled with lots of really cool dynamic things happening, visually or otherwise. I mean, so many people talk about, wouldn't it be great if we could unbind the vortex or mess around with that a little bit? Or a lot of people have said, wouldn't it be great if we could have the narrative quest lines of Warhammers 1 and 2 in Immortal Empires to choose to engage with or stop to certain degrees, and then seeing what the outcome is. And I assume actually probably the Vortex unbinding or might well be one of the options in the end times to, you know, maybe you can't stop Nagash, but you can blow it all up with the Vortex. So just
that is what happens. In the end times in the lore, that is what happens. The Vortex is unshackled. Not to stop Nagash, but it is unshackled. So I think you're absolutely right.
You make an interesting point, I think, because I'd forgotten that Realms of Chaos was a thing, and obviously all the DLC they release tends to have to be released for the game. You know, they're releasing the thing for, but they have said that you can now get Warhammer 1 and 2 as like add-ons. Have I made that up? I don't think I've made that up, right?
Yeah.
Everyone has access to Immortal Empires now.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, the idea is, I think if in a way they could. And you know what? Maybe I wouldn't be surprised if they did. I almost feel like they'd make a separate launcher somehow, which lets you just go into Immortal Empires for free. You don't have to buy any of their games, any of their DLCs, because ultimately they just want people, because it is a vehicle to sell other DLC by encountering these other lords now and all these other packs and stuff like that. At the moment, they've dropped the restriction down to if you own any of the main trilogy of games, you'll have Warhammer 3's Immortal Empires campaign, which obviously benefits you massively. If you're a person that bought Warhammer 1 and just didn't get around to playing the others or buying them, and you now have that update, you also get all the quality of life improvements that came with Warhammer 3 and 2 across the way. And there's quite a stark difference between where Warhammer 1 was and where Warhammer 3 is now in terms of just, you know, basic UI functions and how you level up your lords and things like that, and how other mechanics work. I wouldn't be surprised if they go a step further and actually make it like almost like a free-to-play entry-level campaign with the likes of all the free LC lords and characters to get people in. And again, because of the way they've always structured their DLC, which is that you'd never have to own the DLC to encounter the DLC lords in your own campaign. You just can't play as them. That's the ultimate marketing strategy, right? Like going, here's this new shiny thing. You don't even need to buy it to encounter it and interact with it, fighting them. But if you want to then play as them because you know what, I don't know, it was really fun facing this tough high elf lord, you're like, I'm going to go buy Aislinn. That seems fun. Oh wow, he's got his whole unique mechanics as well. Like that just seems like a perfect vehicle to do it. So I kind of expect them to do that. But yeah, now what they've done by decoupling all that is to just essentially go, Warhammer 1 is a faction pack of Empire, Dwarves, Greenskins, and Vampire counts for those legendary lords. Again, it works because it's all tied to a legendary lord, as we said at the start of legendary lord, then the faction. It makes perfect sense, and I think it does make ultimately Immortal Empires more accessible, which is the one that they're constantly updating. Which again, like makes me feel like we've got so many more years left of fresh content still coming to Immortal Empires. I think it's wrong to almost say coming to Warhammer 3 because I think it's actually trying to separate that out into the campaign. The campaign is the product now, which is Immortal Empires and all those things to it. And they've said that End Times actually is coming as a free update to that. So you will be able to still interact with some level of ultimate endgame. It's more the lords and perhaps some additional events and situations that will be tied specifically to the DLC.
And also, I think, I struggle to understand it, but I think what they said is you can just buy Lords of the End Times. If you don't own Warhammer 3, you can just buy Lords of the End Times and get access just to the End Times portion of Immortal Empires.
Yeah, but I assume a part of that will be you'll get access to the full.
Yeah, you'll get Nagash on Immortal Empires
if you want to. So that also kind of builds on my point of them. Maybe they won't just necessarily make it free right now just to dive into Immortal Empires because they're doing that as a standalone DLC. I also assume that means that the price it'll be somewhere between a full, it won't be, it's going to be somewhere in between a DLC and a Saga game. I assume it's going to be in that £25 to £30 price mark, more so than the 15 to 20 that we've seen before. Sorry, also I've been completely unraveled by the fact that Dino Man believes that Vib is Henry Cavill.
I mean, I am ridiculously restrained in not pointing that out.
I get that a lot.
I mean, he's absolutely right.
I mean, now he's said that, I can't not unsee a little bit of.
You've not met him in person. I can guarantee he is not Henry Cavill.
I am much more charming. It is true. No, it's unfortunately not true.
I think you've answered Neurosis's question as well, which is this the last DLC? No. They've been very clear this is not the last DLC. As we said at the start of this section, this is the almost the start of a new wave of DLC.
Yeah. It's kind of a weird spot because I think perhaps 10, 15 years ago, this would have been Warhammer 4. Yeah, they're going for another one. You know, I feel like they would have started another chapter here because of the wealth of stuff they can do. And I kind of feel like almost unofficially, some people potentially will view it as that, as the chapter is now almost coming to a close with Warhammer 3 and what it did, but that continues now with almost Warhammer 4, the end times. And this is only, you know, death is only the beginning. It's, you know, a tagline from The Mummy that works still to this day.
Great film.
Yeah.
They're making a new one.
Cracking film. Yeah, they're getting the cast back. I love it.
Yeah, the OG cast or the horrific Tom Cruise situation.
No, Brendan Fraser.
Oh, no. Brendan Fraser. Yeah. Rachel Weisz. Yeah,
so exciting.
Would be great.
Again, we distract ourselves.
I blame Henry Cavill.
There's an interesting.
Well, Walton Goggins is now being mooted as well. I mean, this is great. I should come on your stream more often. This is fantastic for the ego.
It's an interesting suggestion from Micromedia. This is going back to our conversation about Neferata. Could Neferata come out as a single Lord pack in the spring, and then End Times Nagash in the summer to increase the DLC drop rate? I think it's possible, but I think it's unlikely. Now, it is true that they haven't announced, I don't think, any legendary lords except for Nagash. And everyone has assumed that Neferata is one of them. But everyone else, with the exception of Wallach Harkon, who is a hero, is already in the game. So it could be that the expectation is they'll almost shadow drop Neferata a few months in advance, and then the four lords are different. Yeah. It's a possibility, I think.
I mean, also for me is probably the thing I'm least certain of is honestly that summer 2026 release date. I'd love to say I've got confidence in their release dates, but I have zero confidence in their release dates. No. I mean, hopefully though they've righted the ship and that, you know, they're I think honestly all of this is still the hyenas and the restructuring post-COVID, you know, all the redundancies. They went through several rounds of it. I think they're finally standing on their feet again, and you know their teams have been reorganized so much, and obviously they've been working with, you know, whatever kind of teams they can throw together to keep things moving forward for Warhammer 3, because it's the only thing that's got the light on selling right now, because it's the only product they actually have actively launched. So I do feel like we are hopefully going to start seeing some fairly solid kind of ramping up, at least, or consistencies becoming more normal rather than all of this shaky foundations of dates, because it's just resources that they're lacking and you know, trying to shuffle everything out. I'd like to think that things are a bit more concrete now, and I think, you know, they themselves have said, you know, that it obviously was never ideal that it would be 12 months between Warhammer 3 DLCs. I mean, I think they went into this from the launch, and I mean, that's where it unraveled right from the start, really, of Warhammer 3. But, you know, I think they were aiming for the heyday, essentially, of Warhammer 2's DLC, where we were often getting a new DLC every 2 or 3 months. I mean, it's weird to think back that was kind of oddly the golden age of additional content drops, paid or otherwise. And then we went to go, okay, we're getting one DLC every 6 months. And then we're like, oh, that's not too bad. Then one DLC every sort of 8 months. And we're like, you know, it won't take longer than that, right? I mean, ultimately, I'm never going to complain for a delay making the product better. And I think that is still broadly a lot of the elements at play. But I think also it's because of, you know, either mismanagement, resources, and you know, everything that comes in between there as well. But yeah, I'd love to go, yeah, it's definitely coming out summer 2026, which is why I think also everyone really has a tough time right now trying to work out when's 40K coming out, when's Medieval 3 coming out, because one, their phrasing's pretty vague, or they're just not telling us. And I think they're also just not telling us because in a way they almost don't know themselves, because they don't know what might happen between now and then. They might have a repeat of what's previously happened to them and big shakeups, and that, you know, they can't commit to specific dates anytime soon. But it is interesting to see that they obviously feel confident though that the only one they have given a date to out of all of their announcements over the past week or so is Lords of the End Time, and they are currently aiming for summer 2026.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Has anyone got a bookies that takes bets on?
I think it'll be a lot closer to summer 26 than we've had so far. I feel like, especially in recent times, because the DLC's only just come out, right, and they got beat up badly for have so many delays and whatnot. So them to say no, summer 26, if they already think actually it's probably going to be closer to winter 26, it feels like they've got more confidence. I mean,
summer.
I don't think it gets said enough, but like,
well.
fair play to CA. They've been wrangling 10-year-old code at this point, to still work in a modern day game. And it doesn't surprise me that when they introduce something new, that something somewhere completely unexpected breaks, and they have to spend 3 months figuring out what the hell happened.
Do you remember the DLC break? So they introduced a hotfix that I can't remember exactly what it did. It was like it fixing the Tomb King's AI hotfix, and it broke people's access to DLC, which made no sense at all, because there's no reason those two things should be talking to each other. But just the nature of the spaghetti.
Google.
Yeah. I mean, at least they had obviously that they can't apply War Core to Warhammer 3, because at this point it'd be rewriting the whole game onto that new engine. So you could probably have that in about 4 years' time, perhaps, if they had the staff and resources and everything else for it. So obviously, Warhammer 3 is going to stay on its current code base. It makes the most sense. But yeah, hopefully, I mean, obviously the thing is, new engine is exciting, but it also means new problems are coming, or potentially old problems in new ways. I mean, because the last example we had of a new engine was Empire Total War, and again, it was a very ambitious title, jumping from Medieval 2. It added in naval combat. It added in lots of new mechanics and features, and I still love it despite it being an absolute buggy mess and being the first iteration of that engine. And obviously, the engine hasn't stayed the same from Empire to now, but it's a modular engine built on that same framework, which is why up until I think it was halfway through Warhammer 2's life cycle, you could still find some database entries to Empire in Warhammer 2's code, because it's just been left over because they chop and change and swap bits out. But from my understanding, War Core is a brand new code base. I don't necessarily think they completely started from scratch. I think they probably took as much as they could strip out while it's still turning on of the last engine, and then
build
give
from
it a
there.
good sponge, clean it. Right, there's no spaghetti left. There's a bit of sauce down there. Yeah, mop that, and then let's start putting in the new modules that we built from the ground up for these elements and
It's
everything
the same
else.
fundamental basic foundation, right? Unless they've gone so far off the formula for 40k. There's two layers. You need multiple entities that you can move around. You need a resource management system, and it needs to be turn-based. If you could strip the Empire engine down to those absolute basics with nothing else, and then build from there, that foundation is pretty solid.
Yeah, I think it's ultimately, when you strip it back that far, are you left actually with anything usable, or just a spreadsheet with some principles written on it, which are your design pillars?
Which brings us neatly
you're playing
on to
a Paradox
Medieval 3.
yeah.
What's wrong with that?
There you go. Yes, Medieval 3.
Speaking of just a piece of paper with Medieval 3 written on it. I think it'll be really interesting. So I think it's next week. There is a live stream where they're explaining what it means for something to be in pre-production, because there's all sorts of armchair experts on the internet. I mean, you're speaking to two of them who have views about what pre-production means, but it's not a standard industry term. CA will have their own definition of pre-production that will be different from Larian's, that will be different from Obsidian's.
EA.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and it's also not the first time they've tried to make Medieval 3. They've been clear about this. This isn't their first go at it. But we don't know very much about it at this stage. I think what's telling is it's a real actor trailer that they've done.
Yeah, it's a full mixed CGI actor announce. It is the announce of it, and I think the issue is that people hear pre-production and they see what little is announced and think they just scribbled this down on a napkin at their last meeting last week. They're going, we've got to do this showcase video. We haven't got a title. Quick, what should we do? Who pull a hat, pull Empire 2, World War 1, Medieval 3. Medieval 3 is the winner. There we go. We're going to go with that one. Quick, write it down, send in the script, get some people to put some crowns on their heads and some sit on a chair, and we'll put a nice logo that says Medieval 3 on it. I mean, I think that was probably where they were at probably a couple of years ago. That's realistically, and they've been figuring out, because I as I said, like we've talked about it a lot, the reason perhaps as well, not just with lack of resources and a big shuffle up of staff, obviously redundancies and everything else, them committing to develop a new engine or a substantial revised iteration going forward, that's where probably a lot of their devs have been working on that would have otherwise been working on a new historical. And they were like, we can either make some more historicals right now, and they'll be roughly at the same level where we currently are with the same problems and the same issues affecting them, or we can not release another historical, potentially have a gap of nearly a decade between them, but we can build a new foundation to then launch our next decade plus of titles on. And that will be hugely beneficial in the long run. And I think that's what they've done. And again, I'm not surprised why there's so much kind of confusion with the community, because I think there are still better ways for them to communicate some of this. I think the pressure of it being in a showcase was that we've only got so much time that we can say some things. We can't say the full bit that we really want to say, that this has been a project passion,
Passion project?
Passion project is what I'm trying to say, and my brain was just like, no, that's not the way.
Why are you helping
It's
him
4
out?
o'clock on a Friday afternoon. Give up, mate. No, I refuse. Absolutely not. A passion project that they've obviously wanted to do for quite some time. They've attempted to do in the past, but they couldn't do it until they had the tech in the right state for it. And now they feel confident enough to actually take it fully into production at the stage of pre-production, but you still start production as it were, like the production and then pre-production stage of getting all your concepts together, working out what the core pillars are, what the core design elements are you need to work on, era specific things. I actually think they're probably a fair ways through that now. Otherwise, I don't think they'd be confident enough to reiterate or explain some of those points next week, potentially in this additional stream that they're looking to do. So I'm not expecting them to suddenly go, and here's the England campaign gameplay. That I'm not expecting, but I'm expecting them to have a bit more substantial things to say. Obviously, the showcase again didn't necessarily add a lot of confidence to that at times, because they were like, we haven't even chosen a start date yet. We think it might be here. It's like, because to a lot of people, they identify that as like a core starting point of going, where does the game start? Let's do that. And it may well be that, funnily enough, that's actually, they know broadly where they're going to work within, but actually they haven't just pinned down whether it's going to be 1086 or 1087, broadly within that sphere.
They know, I would wager, they know the kind of gameplay experience that they're going for, and they know within a 200 to 300 year period when that gameplay experience is likely to take place. Infantry armies going from levies to semi-professional, knights, the development of armor, perhaps the introduction of gunpowder and things like that. So that sets you broadly, as you say, sort of from about the 1080s through to the late 14, early 1500s. But whether it starts in 1066 or 1287 doesn't actually matter, really. Not if you can get those core foundations right, I don't think. It's from a personal perspective, Medieval 2 was the first Total War that I played, and so I'm wildly excited at the idea. I am, almost because we know so little about it, terrifyingly nervous about how it's going to turn out, I think.
Yeah. There's a lot of, well, it's not even that there's a lot of question marks about it. We just don't know enough about it to really even have questions forming, where to direct those questions above why, what, where, when, how. Yeah. We don't know what the core basis of it is. They did actually, I quite enjoyed the insight blog post they did of what their vision was. I actually quite liked hearing that from the devs of what their perspective was. It's something I've said before, but it'd be interesting to see a more specific one about what they believe their core design pillars are for the game, because I often think that where perhaps the biggest conflict between the community and what CA actually deliver is because CA sometimes have quite different core design pillars versus what the community expects there to be in a specific game. And I think an example of that potentially was Rome 2. The community had a slight, I don't think we were well off. too far off the mark. I mean, Rome 2 broader problems was that it wasn't the Siege of Carthage demo that wasn't anywhere close to that, and there were numerous other issues with it, and largely unfinished, and it took them a year to kind of get it to the state where actually it should have been at launch. But I think where things missed the mark in terms of good chunks of the community not being happy with a certain implementation of a specific feature, or where there is that kind of disconnect between what CA believes the core design pillars are of a game versus what the community expects it to be. And I think that actually is, in some cases, potentially troubling. And I mean, an example I saw of that was Warhammer 1. I don't know if it was a Creative Assembly event that they held or just a piece of their PR, but the brand manager at the time explained that the kind of core design pillars for Warhammer 1, sieges weren't that important to them. It wasn't a core design pillar, which is why we had single wall sieges. Whereas the community went, you've got to have full 360 sieges. We've always had full 360. That's a core, vital, integral part. And eventually they kind of realized that and changed up the design into Warhammer 3, which still isn't ideally what the community perfectly wants from it, but it's certainly better than what Warhammer 1's implementation was, at least in terms of a form, because that was the argument they had. They wanted function over form, and they said a functional one wall will mean the AI can perform better because it's got less things to worry about. It's only got one way it can be attacked, so it can use better tactics. And I think they eventually went, it wasn't that AI improved to manage multiple fronts. It was more that the fact that the player just didn't find that enjoyable, and they actually wanted, if the preference was single wall, semi-effective AI, but not enjoyable experience versus brain dead AI, but enjoyable visual experience and attacking from different options as a player and a fun experience as a player to assault or defend, which one's preferable? And is the latter.
I think somewhere where that's really been obvious is in their 3 most recent quote unquote historical titles. So Three Kingdoms, Troy and Pharaoh. Those were all billed as, broadly speaking, historical, or in, I guess, Troy's case, the truth behind the myth. And they landed so poorly because that's not what the historical community wanted, to the extent that the historical community want a single thing. And you had records mode in Three Kingdoms, but that was 100% an afterthought. And the fact...
But also, as I always say with Three Kingdoms is meant... It plays best as romance because all the features were designed for romance. But it's just frustrating that, the design pillar there was, we want a larger than life retelling of the romance period, rather than going, we want a really grounded, gritty, historical... I'm
not remotely arguing with you. I think my point is, don't put records mode in. They just shouldn't have done it. It shouldn't have been there.
Yeah, they should have left it as...
if you're going to do it, almost design records mode from the ground up. Don't have it. All we do is we take the generals and we tone down their stats and give them a bodyguard.
Yeah. Well, I think we had the same problem with Troy. Say, Truth Behind the Myth, I actually quite liked that, because I was like, okay, they're actually showing why today we have folklore and mythology, because there's a little nugget of truth somewhere buried deep within something. Obviously there wasn't this massive bull man, but actually he was wearing the carcass of a bull, on part of his helm or something like that, and he was a big burly bloke. So obviously he was known as the bull of the Aegean or something like that, and that's why we've got this character present. But then I feel like they completely undid that by going, here's the Mythos pack.
Yeah.
I was like, no, don't either stick and drive to that. We're trying for something historical set in a realm that we have very little historical record of, but it's a very exciting, we've got the Odyssey around it. And initially I thought, it's going to be another Romance of the Three Kingdoms. It's going to be a Romance of the Odyssey. And it wasn't initially. And then Mythos fully took it over to that. I mean, obviously it's optional, it's DLC. You don't have to get that. But I just feel like, again, from a design perspective, they were always signaling that they were keeping the foot. They were hybridizing Total War, and I've said this for a long time. Stop hybridizing CA. You can actually make games that will appeal to all of your fantasy lovers, to your historical lovers. You'll actually make a better game, and you will appeal to them better if you make a fully focused historical and a fully focused fantasy. You don't need to overlap, because you don't make a single title that is good in that overlap. You can make good historicals and you can make good fantasies. Don't try and bridge them, because it doesn't work. It's ultimately not really what any majority of consumers want in that space.
About 80% of your fans are going to buy every game you make. That's probably slightly high, but most of your fans are going to buy every game you make as long as it's good. And then there is a minority of fans on both sides who won't buy the other one, and they won't buy a hybrid because they'll think it's the other one. So don't try and appeal to them. I think you're absolutely right.
We shan't get into it because we'll be here for days, but it's just a feature of modern game production, I think, that this is the way it works, especially with games that have got or meant to have such longevity as the Total War series. Right, I think this is just it, and they're trying to sort of appease both sides, and vocal minorities become really important in all this. And I think you're both absolutely right. They just need to say, no, here's Medieval 3. Screw screw fantasy completely. Right, you'll have 40k, you'll have end times, you'll have all this other stuff for it.
I don't want to see Richard the Lionheart leaping over stuff, killing hundreds of warriors. He needs a bodyguard. Because also historically, kings didn't just suddenly go, right, chaps, follow me, on me Larry as a single entity. They were, protected by an elite group of their retinue. That that's why we have, the word and its meaning. Everything comes out of that close knit bodyguard. They're not just gonna wander in on their own, so it has to be. And the thing is, there's so many fun mechanics they could build into a retinue system of upgrading your bodyguard or giving them specific, they can build in that Warhammer equipment system to a historical relevant degree of giving them better weapons or giving them some new heraldry or something like that. Or or they're I don't know, you a retinue that focuses on a kingdom that's in the desert, or is going to have different equipment and weapons and cultural stuff than one in England or something like that. It's going to make sense. And maybe even your actions, if you're do lots of ambush battles, it's going to give your retinue a different bit of gear to represent that you're very effective skirmishers or ambush tactics or something like that. That's the way they can build in that kind of RPG level into it while still maintaining that grounded historical feel, because you're upgrading something that would have been fairly personal and specific to the leader of that unit as a retinue. But yeah, let's hope we don't have. Oh, here's the button where it turns Richard into the spirit of a lion.
Or an actual lion shows up.
Please, please, absolutely not. Please, dear gods, no.
But they had activatable abilities in Medieval 2, and they work really well because it's like your general gives an inspiring speech to improve the leadership of this one unit who's about to break.
Yeah,
that's fine.
They were basically massive morale buffs that. And part of how they fit into the kind of the gameplay meta of Medieval 2 was that it was a massive morale boost. So you'd want to do it just as your men were about to break, and they'd suddenly rally. As okay, we don't necessarily have history isn't full of at the last minute Henry raised his sword and said
William the Conqueror takes his helmet off at Hastings.
But that is the sort of thing that activatable ability is trying to represent. Everyone suddenly sees the king and hope rallies, and they dig in their shields and they give the spear line another push forward, and they start to hold. Empire and Napoleon specifically, you had rally and you had inspire. Inspire made your troops, it maxed out your reload speed temporarily. It's probably a bit overtuned, but those are the only two abilities you really need, something specific of rally the troops in terms of a morale boost, and maybe something that very temporarily, briefly ups a few stats by a few points. But you don't even need that really. Lots of things can be done passively to represent experience
you can do it,
of your troops through
campaigns. You could do it dynamically as well. So we're just spitballing here, and I know we're running out of time, but so say, for example, you have Richard the Lionheart, who's probably a bad example for this, but leading a cavalry charge with his retinue and the Knights of England.
Oh, he's dead.
But at that point, the units that are immediately around the king receive a tiny buff because they are inspired by the actions of the king. It's not even an activatable ability. It's just something that happens based on what's happening on the battlefield.
Yeah,
that or the literal fist of the Christian god will come and smite.
Yeah, or that, right? You just take the sword of Khorne mechanic.
I wouldn't mind a Monty Python Life of Brian DLC where suddenly you get given the holy hand grenade that you can use once as an activatable ability. But you have to start counting, and it will activate your microphone. And if you don't lob it exactly when you say 3, it'll just blow up your whole army.
Quite right.
But yeah, it's 100% Richard the Lionheart could single-handedly take 1,000 men army, but only if he dies by a single crossbow shot. He's got negative 200% missile resistance. That's
he's
what
got
he's got.
1 HP, but infinite weapon strength. Okay.
I mean, that's the thing. Sorry, just mentioning hit points. I really hope this new engine moves away from the Warhammer hit point system, or can be moved away from it. Obviously, we know that 40k is being built on Warcore. We know that Medieval 3 is being built on Warcore. So it wouldn't be a surprise then if they shared those inherent same hit point values. But I think it would be a mistake to take the hit point values or framework from Warhammer Fantasy, if that translates into 40k, into the next historical, because I think that is part of the problem. Medieval 2 still had hit points. Like, hit points aren't a new thing to Total War. They've always had hit points, but, you know, your peasant unit had 1 hit point and your general had 5 hit points. So he could take 5 attacks that would have led to a hit point reduction before he would have been killed.
I think that's
I think the system they need to go back to, because that also works far better for sync kill animations, because it doesn't have to figure out a weird threshold for a sync kill to work out when a unit's got 10,000 health, and you're like, well, a sync kill can occur somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000, but only if this stat modifier is applied. You know, it makes it sense that, you know, if a peasant's got 1 hit point, it means every single attack that is successful has then another chance to roll a nice sync kill animation if things align up. With the general, he takes 4 hits, and then on the 5th one, it's a sync kill animation. You know, that's the stuff I think they need to get back to, because that's the gritty stuff they want. One other thing I have remembered before we run out of time. Blood DLC is gone.
I heard that,
yeah. Because they've essentially said it is a core component of the 40k. They basically, I think the question was, will there be a blood pack? And it was no. We see blood as a vital part of the experience, of the immersion and everything else. So they haven't said it'll be in there as standard, but that's what it's saying. So I assume, and I guess it's because you probably can't sell anything less than a 40k game at 18 plus.
I assume.
It's not something like it goes, here's the Space Marine Care Bears coming for a cuddle. It's
a brutal setting. It's a fundamentally incredibly brutal, much worse than fantasy setting.
Though, that is also then the standard then going forward, that Medieval 3 will have blood, but not as a DLC. I don't think they can turn it off, as it were, and then add it back on when it suits. I think this is kind of a pivotal point in that they'll go, you know what, for the longest time we've said, oh, we don't want to affect the age ratings. I think the reason why they're willing to accept the potential market loss of 16 to 17 is because they're now expanding to consoles.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So any loss that they had in that age range is going to be more than made up by the fact that they are, I mean, they're not even going to treble their, I mean, because console market is just so much bigger than the PC market. They never released the full sales numbers, but I would love to know how it sells. I would love to see those figures, especially for consoles as well.
We'll see it in revenue.
First one into it.
We won't see it in individual sales, but we'll see it in revenue.
To know the numbers would be, I mean, I can't assume that it's not going to sell well. It's 40k. And it's going to be a strategy game, because I see it all the time. Comments on videos decades old. Is this on consoles yet? No. People want, and in that case, at least, CA are delivering on something the community wants. There are plenty of console games out there desperate to play Total War that don't have the funds for a PC, or just aren't interested in getting into PC gaming, that desperately want to play the series and have never been able to.
To your point, though, Violet has just pointed out in chat, I mean, 16-year-olds are playing 18 plus games anyway.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
not going to lose that many.
It's an arbitrary system, right? I remember having to ask my mum to buy me Company of Heroes, because that was 18 plus, I believe, or 16 plus, and I was probably 13 at the time. And I remember her having to go. I went up to the desk and they were like, "No, you can't. Have you got your parent with you?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I went, "Mum, can you get?" And she was like,
naughty boy.
Yes, I was so naughty boy, Brian. That's
I know. I think
that's what it's what you do, isn't it? It's what happens, right? It's not not exactly a barrier to entry. It's it broadly has far more importance to game companies and all sorts of media in terms of how they can advertise, more so than actually going, we want to restrict a portion of our consumers. They know they'll get it one way or another. They'll ask mum and dad, or uncle, auntie, or a stranger in the game shop to go and buy it for them. Here's the cash, please, thank you.
It feels like a complete no-brainer, as you say. The console market is going to massively outweigh that potential loss.
That tiny little bit, and it'll be almost in the end frustrating that they waited this long to do it. But it's the one that makes the most sense. If it wasn't going to be Warhammer Fantasy, 40K absolutely is. I mean, isn't the life of anyone in the 41st millennium? Wake up, bathe in some blood. Yeah. Scrub last week's blood off, put some more blood on.
Some corpse bricks,
Yeah. All the
so
stuff.
I have two last questions before we drop off. I don't know, Vib, if you've got anything you want to add or ask at this point.
Depends on what your questions are, doesn't it?
That's very fair. So what I walked into that one. What, for both of you, what is the single feature that you most want to see in Medieval 3, and it cannot be General's Retinues?
Single feature.
Or what gameplay experience?
Am I going to have to say naval battles? I might say naval battles. I think it's going to be hard to get away from that in Medieval 3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, in general, I want meaningful depth. As we've talked about before, not just layers for the sake of having layers, but I want population. I mean, they talked about raising levies or how you would go about recruiting troops, and they want that to be impactful and meaningful. Well, raising your levies, at least in the early medieval sort of mid-period, your armies are coming from your peasants, and if they're not working in the fields because they're serving in your army, you're going to make less money, or there's going to be less food. Those should all be impactful things, and those don't need to be that deep, but everything needs to be a bit more interconnected and have a bit more rhyme or reason and response to it to adequately reflect the period, but also take the series forward. I've had a fair bit of pushback actually on some of the tweets that I put out saying I wanted more depth, and lots of people were saying like, no, we just want Medieval 2 with new graphics. We deserve better than just that. The nicest way possible. If that's what you want, Medieval 2 better graphics, you want a remaster. You don't actually want Medieval 3.
We've invented so much game design since Medieval 2. Let's use it.
Yeah. The copy and pasting to different eras works for a time, but every so often we have to push the envelope forward, and this is one of those times. I'm not saying it suddenly needs to be, and I use Crusader Kings 3 as an example for some aspects, but I don't want Crusader Kings campaign with Total War battles. But I want elements of things that matter, like how you can play in Crusader Kings with intrigue and more rich diplomacy, trade and economy all being impactful. If I have to choose one, that I'll say population, because I think that spirals out to lots of other different areas.
Neat, yeah.
That's neat. And then last one's a bit of a joke question, given how much we know. But what's everyone's first campaign going to be?
England.
So basic.
Just that's easy. England. Okay, to not give the basic one, Milan if they've still got killer crossbowmen.
Fair enough.
I mean, can I say anything other than the Netherlands? I don't think I can.
I wish that you would say anything other than the Netherlands.
Well, in that case, 100% Netherlands.
Neurosis in chat, Wales if it's still free. The Welsh rebellions begin.
I like to think that Neurosis is hoping... Yes, obviously. I like to think that Neurosis is hoping that Wales alone will be a free download for Medieval 3. So if you play only as Wales, you can get the whole game for free. Because that would be...
Which is that's the reward, is it? If you manage to overthrow the English as just
you
the
can
Welsh.
only ever play as Wales. Wales is just a free download. Like we were talking about for Immortal Empires, you can download the Medieval 3 map and just play as Wales.
For free, you can only ever play as Wales.
No, I like to think that Medieval 3 is like the ultimate sandbox and everything's super scripted and you can rewrite history unless you play Wales, in which case, turn 2, you always get taken over by England, no matter what you do.
What, the Black Prince is just a
you just get everything set up perfectly. Plan out all your economic upgrades, you do all your diplomacy, you set your research off, you hit end turn, and then England has destroyed all your forces. Bend the knee, my lord, or die. Yeah.
That's what I want.
Wales is the free demo nation. Yeah. No, I can understand that. Yeah. Bohemia in there, Holy Roman Empire, lots of people saying France.
Yeah. It's very exciting. What a time to be a Total War fan, I think is the note to end on.
Yeah, I mean, we've waited a long time to hear the showcase info, not just this year being the 25 years of Total War, but a lot of these things are things that people have been waiting a long time for. New engine, Medieval 3, 40K. I'm optimistic. I don't know if inherently because of creating content on Total War, that's my bias that I'm going to be. I try to be balanced with it. I try to be cautious with it. I can't help but feel excited though, and I think if I can't help but feel excited, then it's obviously something's going right somewhere. I think they're making the right noises for once, and yeah, let's see it. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be problems. I'm sure there's going to be pitfalls along the way, and probably at release and everything else. But I just hope that the core experience is solid, and I hope that for Medieval 3 at least, it is a proper historical, which, at least from the framing of what they said in their design brief and in the showcase, they've said that that's their goal. So, it might be ill-placed trust for now, but I'm going to trust that that's what they try and deliver on.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, it's been fun to do this. I've not done a podcast myself this year with Midgeman, so it's been fun to kind of jump back on one. Actually, really enjoyed designing the
that was fantastic. We need to come back.
That was a fun little highlight,
I think, because you've got the overlay.
I mean,
now.
if we can do this sort of time on a Friday, I can kind of every so often I can tolerate.
I mean, if you want to replace Sean, that's entirely fine with me too.
Whoa.
Right, so you're the problem then.
So I'm told.
Cavill's in.
Cavill is in.
Yeah, Henry Goggins or Walton Cavill.
We have a regular listener who has two sort of teenage daughters who is apparently convinced that we are Tom Hiddleston and Benedict Cumberbatch. So she is going to be.
God, that's an awful Temu purchase.
I know, she's going to be so upset, isn't she? If
it does answer. It does answer Nerd Rage Fred's question,
here.
Who is just raided, by the way. So thank you for that. But we are in fact Benedict Cumberbatch and Tom Hiddleston.
Yes, we are. This is what we look like when we don't have Hollywood makeup on. The wonders of modern cinema.
We don't know who the guy in the middle is. I'm afraid he's just sort of snuck on here.
Never seen him before. The one with the beard.
Never heard of him.
Just wandered in one day, out of the cold, with patches on his arms. Oh, getting really itchy.
On that note,
yeah.
On that note, yeah. Charity waxing fundraiser. That just to add some context. Otherwise, this is the weirdest way. Is it the weirdest way you've outroed?
It's up there.
Have you gone further?
Possibly not. Yeah.
It's up there. Christ. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Well, no. Thanks for joining me on this, and thanks for kind of spitballing the idea to me a while back, because I know this is a fun way, I think, to certainly break down the big announcements that they do, because there's lots to it, and it's good to kind of structure it. And I think also chat has enjoyed it as well, as a way of hearing a little bit more. It stops me rambling as much. I can see you desperately trying to rein us in at times of being like, right, get them back on as a bullet point, God's sake.
Finish your point.
But yeah, if you guys in chat haven't checked out Expertise is Overrated, then do have a listen to their podcast. It's pretty good, I think. I'll probably have to start listening to it now. I mean, I've always listened to it.
I don't know, because then you can't lie and say it. Well, then you'd have to lie and say it's pretty good. Now you can say it in good faith.
No, I have deniability now. I'd be like, I've been told it's all right, but I've been told by these two, so take that.
We are completely impartial. Really.
It's unlikely we'd have ever said it's good.
We're also, as everyone can tell, we're really bad at ending things. So I'm going to stop the recording. I think the stream will continue.
And continue it did. There you have it. As you can tell, I've drawn the short straw and I'm editing this, and apologies for it being quite this janky. It's the most complicated thing we've ever done. But thank you so much for listening to this episode of Expertise is Overrated. No doubt we've said some things that were either objectively wrong or downright offensive. As ever, feel free to let us know, rate the podcast wherever you can, check out our Patreon for bonus content, and come chat to us on our Discord. If you're lucky, like Lionheart was in this particular episode, we might just argue with you in one of our upcoming episodes. If you're really lucky, we might call you an idiot. Thank you again so much to Lionheart for having us. I hope we had fun. I hope it was informative. I hope you learned a bit about our views on Total War, and I hope you're all as excited as we are for what's coming next there. In any case, come back next time here for some more absolute nonsense.